Good evening, members, officers, and those watching at home. Welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Services, Climate Change and Scrutiny Management Committee on today, Monday, the 27th of November. We've received apologies from Councillor Rowley, who will be substituted by Councillor Nichols, although he will be arriving late. We've had apologies from Councillor Baxter, who's being substituted by Councillor Wells. Welcome, Councillor Wells. I think that's all the apologies we have thus far. Housekeeping, we don't have any external guests, so I don't need to tell everybody where the facilities are. So first item of business is declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations they would like to bring forward that aren't on their register of interests?
Yes, Chair.
Yep,
in terms of the York Central item, I had involvement with both the Bus Forum, the York Civic Trust's Transport Advisory Group, and the Environment Forum in terms of making representations on the earlier planning applications for the site. But those have been determined and we are not making decisions today. So I don't think they are prejudicial in the context of today. Okay, thank you very much. I think lots of people had made various representations, but it's no, that's absolutely fine. I see no other declarations of interest. Public participation, we did have one speaker who is registered to speak, not on any items on the agenda, but on the general remit of the committee. However, that person hasn't arrived, so we will move on. There'll be an opportunity, I'm sure, at future meetings where we are talking about the climate change aspects of the committee's work that the public speaker can register to speak at one of those meetings. Okay, agenda item 3, York Central update. We've received an update paper and officers are here to present that. Obviously, one of the roles of this committee is to oversee and scrutinise the council's delivery of major projects, and York Central is probably the biggest. We had planned to take this item in September. We deferred it on the advice that by this point in time the lead developer would have been appointed and they would have come and talked to us about their fantastic plans. However, sadly that hasn't come to pass, but we'll talk about York Central nonetheless. I'm sure there'll be lots of other things to talk about. I know that officers have sought to encourage our partners to come and be part of the discussion and listen to the views of elected members, but sadly none were able to attend, which is disappointing. So with no further ado, I shall hand over to Neil and David, if you could introduce yourselves and take the paper as read, but draw to our attention any particular aspects of the update that you feel are worthy of attention. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So Neil Ferris, Corporate Director of Place. So just as a quick reminder for those viewing at home and for those members who aren't familiar, previously City of York Council had an active role in delivery of the York Central development. Following direct funding award by government to Homes England in partnership with Network Rail as landowners of the funding to deliver the infrastructure, we no longer have a direct delivery role in York Central, but we are a significant funder through the enterprise zone on the site. We are planning authority, for which the site has clearly got its outline planning application, reserve matter application approved for the main principal spine road, but again we're expecting a series of further reserve matters applications to come forward for us to consider. As a planning authority, there's a highways authority in terms of the construction of that principal highway road, We're currently in ongoing discussions with the developer in respect of the future adoption of that highway, and there will be clearly further highway infrastructure as part of the delivery of the York Central development, which we will be engaged in as a Highways Authority. And last but not least, as City of York Council and represented by the leader on the strategic board, we are community champions on behalf of the people of York for this major significant development. Going forward, again, just to reflect, there is an opportunity because we are a minority landowner. About 5% of the land on York Central is still retained by the authority, so we are potentially a future housing delivery partner to the major landowners. We will have a long-term asset on site in terms of the principal highway. We also have potentially possible roles in respect of public realm, such as the area to the rear of the station, identified in the plans for those who can recollect it as the coal drops. And indeed, there is a significant new public park proposed within the development. Again, there's potential role for us there going forward. At this stage, neither of those roles being confirmed nor declined or accepted. Clearly, those decisions would be subject to members. So that's just the sort of overarching piece of our current role, what the potential is for the future, and I'll hand over to David to talk through some of the detail of where we are.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Chair. My name is David Warburton. I'm Head of Regeneration with the Council. You said to take the report as read. Just a couple of points to highlight in the opening paragraphs. I think we all know York Central has been an ambition in terms of the city's ambitions for growth for many years. But there was a real turning point, 2015, and the early part of my presentation will just touch on the sort of milestones from 2015 to date. Clearly, we're here more interested in where we are today and where we will be as we move forward over the next few years, and I'll endeavour to focus on that. There's a key metric at paragraph 5, and we'll look at that. And just an item of correction on paragraph 6, the application for the infrastructure was approved in November 2020, not November 2019. Apologies, that would have been before the outline. Consent was granted. At the end of paragraph 9, there's a link to the York Central info website, and Richard, I think, is going to pull up now for me a little infographic. So rather than me talk, I think there's a really helpful presentation. It is available through the website, and it's 2 minutes long. There's a little bit of music in the background, no words, but I think it just talks through where we are with York Central. And provides some useful context to what I'm going to talk about later. I would urge members, though, we'll circulate if you look on the York Central Info website, there's a huge amount of information. That ownership of that passed from the council to Homes England, as Neil said, when the delivery responsibility passed, and they have now updated that. So hopefully just a really useful summary there rather than me talking, but Richard's just going to bring the presentation up now. Just going to run through, say, a little bit of background in terms of the milestones that have got us to where we are today. And then we can look forward to what we can expect. Thank you, Richard. So an aerial shot dated from about 2010, looking at that distinctive teardrop shape. And showing how completely circumscribed by railway lines the land is. And it's effectively been, apart from perhaps the St. Peter's Quarter, a private rail estate for over 150 years. So a really significant moment for the city. That's the red line on the outline planning application that they submitted in August 2018 and approved December 2019. And I think the scale is really important as well. We can talk about numbers, we can talk about the size in hectares, one of the largest brownfield regeneration sites in the UK, 2,500 homes, that 1 million square feet of commercial space, and that huge new park in the centre. But it's when you compare it with the city centre, the existing city centre, that the scale, I think, becomes really apparent. You've got that graphic just at the bottom on that slide that shows you compare the area of York Central with the city centre, just how much space there is. That's the financial graphic in terms of the investment and the GVA benefit to the local economy. So that 1.16 billion figure arrived at by running the metrics for York Central through the regional economic metric model, and that's Green Book Treasury approved. So that is the official methodology for calculating the value to the local economy over the life of the development. That might be a more familiar image to some. That's the image of the illustrative master plan, which I think was much in the public domain throughout the planning process. It is just an illustrative master plan, though. It was a way for the design team to show what development could look like. The one thing we can assure you is it is not what it will look like, because as the individual reserve matters planning applications come forward over a period of time, the development will take a new form in response to changed circumstances. And clearly, an outline approval in 2019, the world changed quite dramatically over the following 2-3 years. So it will certainly look different from that. Those are the zoning plans. There's a whole set of parameters plans and a design guide to inform that. I think also significantly here, the movement plan, which shows on the basis of the approved infrastructure plan, the new spine road leading through the site from Water End by Severus Bridge, the Millennium Green, and Popperton Road School, leading the full length of the site about a mile from north to south or from northwest to southeast through the site, and then connecting with the Lehman Road tunnel and taking access there with segregated pedestrian and cycle route along the whole of that length, secondary access to feed the residential and the commercial areas. And then this is the sort of timeline that we referred to: the outline planning submission, outline planning approval in December 2019. As Neil mentioned, a fundamental change to the council's role. Although we'd put in the application for housing infrastructure funding to see the site developed out, that was awarded to Homes England in the summer of 2020. Following that, the Reserve Matters application for the infrastructure approved in the autumn of 2020. And CYC played a pivotal role just in getting the site off the ground by doing an enabling contract for enabling works, which completed in May 22. The NRM got planning approval for their central hall in the summer of 22, and the main infrastructure works commenced around about 12 months ago. In terms of where we are now, additional support through enterprise zone funding mechanism, and we're awaiting the announcement of a development partner. In terms of synergies, really critical for the future of the city, but there's also a lot of other activity going on. The council delivering the York Station frontage scheme to transform the area at the front of the station, that key arrival point into the city, demolition of the Queen Street Bridge, and investment in a really significant public realm scheme, so that the front of the station becomes the place that you'd expect when you arrive in a world-class city. New transport interchange facilities with public transport and better pick up and drop off facilities for taxis. As we said, the partnership involving the NRM, they have a vision, 2025 vision, 200 years of railways, 50 years of the NRM in York, and they've got planning permission for a new central hall to span between the Great Hall and Station Hall and provide a new visitor experience. And they're transforming their whole approach from a museum which has some steam trains in it to one which tells the story of the railways and the transformative effect that the railways have had on society over 200 years. Something which, again, you could say is the story of the city of York over that time. The museum square, that first new piece of public realm sitting in front of the railway museum, behind the station. So a new Western Station concourse so that visitors will be able to exit at the rear of the station. Public will be able to access from both sides of the station with a fully compliant and accessible route. Nighttime shot there taken from the design and access statement showing how that space will look, and that's currently subject to the current planning application. And then a government hub for York. It's hoped that one of the earliest developments on York Central will be a government hub. The public engagement that was undertaken by Homes England in January and March this year referenced a significant first phase office building going on the site next to the NRM at the back of the station. The announcements about cabinet office jobs in York have already been made. At this particular moment in time, we don't have any certainty, but we do understand that a huge amount of work has been done, and they had talked about a planning application coming forward again quite soon. Just a few final shots. Again, that's going back to what the site looks like with all those rail lines on it. There was a little bit of drone footage in that short video clip. These are some stills from that showing at the back of the station how the work's already been undertaken to clear the Unipark building, to put temporary parking in, and to create the route for that new spine road to come through to open up the area for the office development. A view looking to the north, and a view in a little bit more detail with the York Yard South on the left-hand side of that shot, but showing the extensive groundworks that have already been undertaken in the 12 months that they've been on site. And then this is looking east from the area through what used to be known as the concrete works, that link onto Lehman Road where the pedestrian cycle link will come through onto the Hudson Boulevard. So going back to that early shot and then the visualization of what that could look like when the site's built out in maybe 10 years' time. And then the final slide, I suppose, where we are now and things that perhaps you would like to be thinking about. The announcement of an incoming developer partner is a huge moment for the city. Developer partner, investor partner, bringing that £500 million of investment to build the site out over the next 10 years or so. Absolutely key to achieving our ambitions for the future of the city, creating that 1 million square feet of business space, the 2,500 up to 2,500 new homes, 20% of which be affordable. Sustainability standards, the design guide that was agreed at the planning application stage sets pretty ambitious standards. There's always scope to go further, and again, conversations with the developer partner about the BREEAM standards or the emerging neighbours standards, which the industry seems to be adopting for development, so that we are able to meet our net zero carbon ambitions. The transformation of the NRM, and then some of the really important connectivity pieces in terms of the Riverside Path to provide a route from the island alongside the river into the city, and that important link to Holgate Road at the Wilton Rise Bridge connection, again, all secured through the planning process. I think the graphic there talked about that huge new public park space in the centre of the development with all the benefits that brings for nature, conservation, biodiversity, and for health and well-being for not just new residents, but also for existing residents. Ambitious targets in terms of tree planting and biodiversity. And then, I mean, it's certainly last but by no means least, the planning approval incorporates provision for new health facilities on the site, and conversations ongoing with partners in the NHS about what those new health facilities and the health and wellbeing offer across the whole site will be. That's the presentation, the report there, and then I think we're here to answer any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm aware that will be sort of new to some members. That will be going over some historic information for some members, but I think it's useful that as a committee we've had the opportunity to get an update. So thank you for that. So our role really as members on this committee is to, I guess, seek assurances about the way in which the project is evolving and developing, and anticipated next steps. And then after we've had a discussion, we can decide when we want to talk about it again. It may be when the next milestone is, which is when the developer partner is appointed, but we can come to that. I've got two hands already, Councillor Taylor and then Councillor Widdowson.
Thanks, Chair. I've got about 7 questions.
Shall I do it sort of batch of 2 or 3 to begin with, and then you can come back in?
So long as you do let me come back in.
I will.
Yeah, all right, thanks. Cheers. I think my first question is, the report's quite vague, so I can see how it might benefit the general public, but I would have hoped we'd have a bit more detail at a scrutiny meeting. So it leads me to ask, what's the financial position at the minute? And I'm asking that not knowing the detail, because the development's been riddled by delays, and obviously inflation is rampant, or has been for a good few years now. So it'd be good to get a bit more on that, especially that knowing that the council has taken on quite a risk with it so far. The second question is whether there's any scope for the 20% affordable housing element of the 2,500 homes being increased. And I asked that question because I think 20% is absolutely woeful for publicly owned land. I know the council's not the only stakeholder in this, but it is publicly owned land. And my third question is, I'll just tick them off, is why haven't we got a master developer announcement yet? At a briefing I received, I think in early September, we were told there was going to be an announcement by the 24th of October. So we're already over a month late. And I guess what I'm getting at here is there some sort of internal clarifications required prior to that announcement? Is there possible risk of a legal challenge from whichever party didn't succeed in that selection process? It's just a concern, really, seeing as everybody seems to be waiting for this announcement, and it just seems to be slipping week by week. They can be my three for now, Chair.
So, summarise for Neil and David. So, a question around potential inflation and cost considerations, affordable housing target, and the developer announcement delay.
Okay, so financial position from the authorities' perspective, we have incredibly little exposure to the York Central side. We members back in 2012 assigned £10 million towards the development of the York Central business case. And that money was used and recycled time and time again with Homes England and Network Rail to bring forward the detailed planning application. And we had a concept of effectively agreed development costs associated with that period. And that money was refunded to the authorities, to the authority from the partners when they got their external funding. So we got something in the order of £4 million back as an authority in respect to the outlay that we'd made during that development phase. Our current exposure at this moment in time is an executive member decision to grant the partners £35 million out of the enterprise zone funding. That funding has not yet been drawn down. That is not yet a risk or exposed for us as an authority. There is clearly a expectation that money will be delivered to the partners for the delivery of the infrastructure, because the enterprise zone was specifically granted to the authority to generate that funding. It's part of the devolution deal, because clearly times have changed, things have changed in terms of certainly in terms of the period of the enterprise zone, which was started off in 2017 for 25 years. A significant period of time has elapsed before we've actually got the prospect of that commercial property being brought forward. So as part of the devolution deal, we wanted to re-engage with government about extending that enterprise zone. Government, as part of the renegotiation, extended that, as proposed, to effectively bring forward another mechanism, because the Treasury apparently don't like the concept of an extended enterprise zone, but it looks and smells and does exactly what an enterprise zone does for the purposes of scrutiny. They proposed a 10-year extension to that mechanism, and we've literally just in the last fortnight received requests for further information from the Treasury in order that they can incorporate that into the bill that's going forward for January for that extension. The extension will effectively occur when the new authority is established. So again, we're expecting that in January, which gives us an extra 10 years in terms of the recovery of the business rates. For those members that aren't familiar with an enterprise zone concept, effectively what that means is that the money, approximately 50% of business rates that goes back off to central government, is effectively retained in its entirety by us as the council for a period of what was originally 25 years. And that additional money, we are effectively, it's ring fenced by the Treasury for us to spend on York Central infrastructure. Concept being, we borrow that money up front, we pass that to the developer to deliver the infrastructure. The interest on that effectively, that loan accumulates, but as the business development comes forwards, they pay their business rates, we pay off the principal sum and the rolled up interest, and that's how that works. So that's the current sort of position in terms of our financial exposure. And clearly, and I'll pick it up in a moment when we come on to the master developer, there will be issues associated with that as well, but I'll pick that up at that. And I'll pass to David on the housing.
So I think the second question was about 20% affordable housing figure, which is that's locked in through the planning approval, and is the opportunity to increase that. So the first thing to say is the planning permission also makes provision for 5% custom build. I think it's unlikely that you'll see self-build plots released on York Central, but custom build where there's a framework for people to do an element of build themselves and to be able to customize the homes to better suit themselves. So that's in addition to the 20%. But I think working with Homes England as a partner, there have been conversations about whether they can do better than 20%. As you know, elsewhere in the housing delivery programme, there are opportunities through bringing in additional grant funding to do just that. And those opportunities need to be explored to the fullest extent. Where the project director is jointly employed by Homes England and Network Rail, you would hope that we have the relationship to pull on. And as Neil referenced at the beginning, we do still have a land holding. We had done some early work on what a housing layout could look like on our land and the adjacent land, and we believe that information was included in the pack that went to the developers. So as and when we're able to open those conversations, we can see what can be done.
And finally, on the lead developer announcement.
Yeah, so as to why there isn't the specific definitive why, clearly that we're not party to that as the council as to why there's not been an announcement, but clearly there are a number of factors at play in terms of the investment market, increased cost of finances, increased inflation costs, but our understanding is that the negotiations continued right throughout the winter and summer of this year, and the bidders that were shortlisted were very keen to develop. So in terms of their commercial appetite for the piece, we're still informed that is very much there. The announcement we were also expecting at the end of October. They've kept it very close to the chest as to why that hasn't been made, but it's not unusual. Certainly, having been involved in significant procurements myself in the past, it's unusual at this final stage for there to be quite a number of clarifications when it comes to the legal dotting of the I's and crossing of the T's in respect of that piece. So I think that's probably where we're at. It's nothing more onerous than actually making sure that there's a clarity of responsibilities. And I just want to pick up on one point from David's piece on the affordable housing. Clearly, the expectation under the new administration's council plan is that we have 100% affordable on council owned land. So we clearly, as we take that into the discussion with the developers, what we wouldn't want to see is effectively an overachievement on council land that would see a reduction in the need to achieve on the rest of the site. So clearly that will be part of the discussions as we go into those pieces as to how our land, your land as a council interacts with that overall planning obligation.
Okay, thank you very much. And I will return to Councillor Taylor later for your next batch of questions. Councillor Widdowson.
Thank you. I've read this several times. We've been given this presentation several times before. The word that I would use, and I think it's echoing some of what Callum has said, is underwhelmed. To actually get to the page 4 and one of the main drivers that we're looking at on here for the financials, and to see HS2 still in the presentation lets me question what else is missing or being in there that shouldn't be in there. I am genuinely disappointed. You know, who's the developer? You've explained nobody's going to tell us. We were told we would know on the 24th of October. Which department is moving up? I think I've had 2.5 years of this department or that department moving up. When will different things happen? The timelines permanently change. And I know it's a 40-year development, and I understand that. But this was supposed to be an update, not a repetition of an historic presentation that I've seen before. I don't know what else to say to you. This is not an update. This is not showing us where it's going. This is a repetition. So how do we get through and understand where the timelines are and what is happening and how it's going forward? And if you could at least please update that presentation and take HS2 out.
Apologies for the HS2 reference. We'll get that removed. In respect of clarity on the update, position reflects the reality for the council. We are not the major developer. We do not have control of the programme. We do not have control of the decisions for appointment. We do not have control of the reserve matters applications coming forward. This is a major significant site in which we have the roles as I ascribed at the beginning of the meeting. So we are not in control of this development. I think the key piece for us as an authority is neither do we have all the financial risks that Councillor Taylor alluded to in terms of the increased financial costs, the increased cost of debt, the increased likelihood of investment in the site, the delivery of those homes. So there is a significant risk transfer occurred back in 2020 when the funding went to Homes England and Network Rail. They're taking on board those risks. They're effectively managing the pieces that Councillor Widdowson would like to see.
You had a supplementary, Councillor
Yeah,
Widdowson?
just a further comment. Neil, I fully understand that, and I understand where we've moved the risk to, and I get that. But would it have been better to have postponed this meeting so that we could have an update rather than a repetition? That's what I'm disappointed with.
Matter for the committee chair.
I shall take that comment on board. Thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I had a couple of supplementaries to the comments that Neil made. So if I can take those at the moment, then I've got another 3 if you want to come back to me later on in the piece.
Okay.
The second of those supplementaries, which was, I hadn't thought of until you said it. So what you were saying in terms of affordable is that it's 20% affordable across the whole site. Therefore, if the council delivers 100% affordable, then that will drop it to probably somewhere around 15% affordable requirement across the rest. But that percentage would decrease. The developer could, within the plan permission, deliver less affordable homes.
Theoretically, they could, but when you consider that the Homes England, who is the principal owner of the site, they're being tasked with delivery of the site, have effectively funded a huge amount of grant funding for our own over policy ambitions on Lowfield and Ordnance Lane, etc. I think there's a sort of degree of pragmatism that needs to be taken about the Homes England's ambition for the overall delivery of higher levels than policy, but clearly you are right in absolute terms.
I like your optimism, which comes to my second point in terms of your optimism of there being no risk. I take your point in terms of risk transfer, but that's £35 million of borrowing on infrastructure. While we've handed over the risk of development, we maintain the risk of managing that cost. So you did go through it quite quickly and it turns around of it. So can you just go back and spell out what the original agreement was over the EZ period of payback, what the extension is and when that extension starts from, please?
Okay, so Dave might have to assist me with the precise date. So the original enterprise zone was awarded in 2017.
Correct. 25 years.
25 years. The new enterprise zone extension ends in 2052.
Yeah, we've got 10 years, so 2042 to 2052. It's additional revenue protection.
So
And is that a fixed extension or given if, for example, they take a year to appoint a master developer?
Yeah, it's fixed.
Will we get a 10-year extension from that point, or wait, that 10 years is ticking already and there's no negotiations in terms of making it 10 plus whatever the delays are?
It's a fixed extension. It's a fixed extension. And in terms of the original 35 million borrowing, which was 2018? 2018, so 5 years ago. If we hadn't had that extension, we made it very clear to government during the devolution negotiations that if there hadn't been an extension, the authority would have had to come back with that decision because it was delegated to officers to take. The clock was ticking, as Councillor Eyre has suggested, and on the basis of where we got to now, had that extension not been given, there would have been a significant degree of further uncertainty with the 35 million borrowing. So we'd have had to come back to members with a remodeled exercise. Where we're at the moment with the 10-year extension, inflation, both in terms of business rates value as well as costs going up. So the two, it's not just it doesn't sit in isolation because the costs going up, revenues go up as well. We are confident that the £35 million would be a reasonable decision for the authority to make. Clearly, if there was further delay in terms of the delivery of the site, then that would be something that we would have to take into account. Members would have to take into account at the time. And it's also true to say that that £35 million, because of the cost inflation, is unlikely to be the final figure. So there will be further decisions for council to consider in respect of the quantum that we borrow, what it funds in terms of infrastructure. But at that point in time, I don't think we'll be in a position to make any further recommendations unless we've got some greater certainty on the delivery of things like the
quick countdown maths then. If it was based on 25 years, we need something on site within the next 4 years to get the same payback period.
The original modelling projected the first buildings be on site in 21-22, and clearly we're a 5-year delay. The earliest likely buildings are 27 at the moment on the current programme.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the update, officers. A couple of questions just arising from discussion, really. The enterprise zone borrowing costs, my maths a couple of years ago had that up at 57 million after borrowing costs at that time. So I'd expect that to be higher now. And it's always been the agreement's always been that the council's the last person, the last partner to get any of its funds back, because Homes England and Network Rail want their profits first. And so I always urge caution there if that's still the case. So I guess that's one quick roundabout question. Linked to that, is the agreement still the same that the partners or partnership are looking for a 20% profit after all their costs to go back into the treasury? Because that's above industry standard, and again, will have consequences for the type of build and development that we've got if we're looking at such excessive profits for partners to be forecasting. So that's another question there. And it's linked again to the last question that I've got about housing. My understanding of the planning application that went through was that it was 20% affordable housing, but with the local plan factors stated within that planning application that 80% of that 20% would have to be council housing, social housing. And so that mean, with my maths, that's 400 council houses on that site out of the 2,500. You know, that's a good thing, but is it viable? Are we going to get hit by the viability at this stage? Or the type of housing? Are we going to see Homes England saying we've got 400 one-bed flats and not addressing the city's housing need? Well, we got teeth to get stuck into those points, really. That's what I'm asking. Chair, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so if I'll do the funding piece and then pass to David to do the housing piece. So on the funding piece, it's not, the council's cash doesn't come from the land values. So it's not a case of that they take the first chunk of value out of the land and we get paid out last. The piece you might be alluding to in terms of our funding being last is that our funding is last in terms of the costs of the infrastructure. So the figure that you saw on the presentation there, the last 35 million going into that would be the council's borrowing, because clearly as we're borrowing it, the cumulative interest, it's in our interests to be borrowing as late as possible when it comes to delivering that money. Our money comes back from that business rates that would have gone back to central government that won't, so we're not taking out of it. So in terms of the value of the asset, we don't have a link to the value of housing market or commercial market in the city. It's in other than through the business rates model. And then I'll pass to David on the housing piece.
Yeah, so on the housing and the 20% affordable housing, the outline planning consent is very clear. It's 20% affordable housing in accordance with the council's policy. So 80% of that 20% is social rent. In terms of how that's managed, that isn't defined, but it's in accordance with the council's policy. So effectively, we have to agree the mix.
So a supplementary, Councillor?
Yeah, be really brief. I appreciate the answers. I may come back to you after the meeting, Neil, on this question, because my understanding of the sequencing of returns post build out is that Homes England and Network Rail specifically are paid first out of any profits, and because my concerns were always about the risks to the council's finances being higher than the other partners, because if there's not enough profits to pay all partners at the end, the council would lose out even after Homes England and Network Rail would have got their dues. So my query is, in essence, they can still make a profit from the development, and the council could still be out of pocket at the end, being the last in the sequence to get anything.
We're talking about two entirely separate pots of money. So let's talk about the developer, Homes England and Network Rail's money. So Homes England and Network Rail have got a big grant from central government flowing through them for the delivery of the infrastructure. We as a partner have got the enterprise zone piece, and I'll come back to that in a minute. In terms of that grant, it clearly provides land value uplift for them as principal landowners. They've got to have that. The reason that clearly they haven't made that appointment of the master developer partner is because they are still agreeing what that master developer partner is going to bring to the table, when those profits are paid out, how those profits are paid out, etc., are all going to be subject to a confidential commercial agreement between Homes England and Network Rail and the developer. But I think David alluded to in his presentation, they're probably bringing in the order of £500 million worth of capital to this project in terms of the peak debt that is required for the development when it's during the construction phases before you sell it all out. So I can imagine that when it comes to certainly my experience of these things, when it comes to who gets paid out first, it will be the banks who get their debt repaid first, and thereafter, if there is some for the developer, Homes England Network Rail, then that will be how they've decided to carve up their commercial deal. We are nothing to do with that commercial land value uplift. Our challenge as an authority and our risk is the delivery of the commercial space in accordance with the outline planning application, because that is what generates the business rates, that generates the margins that have gone back to central government, that stays with us locally, that allows us to pay that debt back at a local level. So the real risk for us as an authority in terms of the delivery on site is to make sure that they deliver the commercial space, because that's what the bit that generates the cash from a social perspective. Clearly the housing piece is really important to us.
Thank you. A few more hands and I'll lap back to Councillors Taylor and Eyre. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. Picking up on a couple of points. The investment partner, so are they tasked with delivering all of the infrastructure and all of the housing and all of the offices, or what's their remit?
So clearly we're not party to that in the level in detail, but our understanding of how it's going to work is that the main infrastructure, that's the spine road, that is the reserve matters application, that government grant, our EZ money is going to deliver that. Everything else is as part of the commercial arrangements between that master developer and the landowners.
Okay. Supplementary to that, well, two really. I think it would be useful, and I think I've picked up from the rest of the members of the committee, if you do take this to an officer decision to sign off the 35 million plus and the reliance on the business rates, I think you should bring it back with quite a detailed paper on where all the money is coming from and going. It's just, if I was to make an ill-informed opinion, I'd say that the actual demand for even grade A office space in the last, when was COVID, 4 years, it's probably dropped quite a lot. Mm-hmm. And then how does that risk profile transfer back to your business rates? Because I presume you'll be building in quite a buffer anyway, so that we don't go into the other 50%. So that's more of a statement than a question.
You care to respond to that statement?
Yeah, so just in quick response to that, it wouldn't be 35 million plus the delegation is specifically for 35 million. Absolutely agree with you in terms of the risk profile on the delivery of the commercial space, and clearly delegation includes the authorities section 151 officers. So I think if there's any concerns in terms of the buffer, and you're right, it's a big buffer in there that is of concern, then that I can imagine that decision would be brought back to executive for a further reconsideration of the risk profile. I think with the 10-year extension to the enterprise zone and the potential for a government hub, I think that's the key here, the delivery of a government hub, then that's what starts to give your finance officer, clearly I can't speak for Debbie, but in terms of your finance officer can see a significant commercial commitment from government to get out and build and occupy, then I can see that would give the level of certainty, that not certainty, but a surety that your finance officer would want before making that as an officer decision. But you are absolutely right to say that, you know, if things change, then officers shouldn't exercise their delegations.
David, you want to?
Thank you, Chair. Just to add on the first point that you made there about what the developer partner investment partners bring. So I think, you know, perhaps thinking about West offices is a good example. There was Harrison Developments backed by the Clue property as the investor bringing the cash, and you know, they perhaps then worked in partners with others to actually deliver the development as a whole, and that is what would happen at York Central. There'll be a headline developer with an investor partner who is raising the finance, but they will almost certainly already have alliances in place to deliver housing, perhaps some specialists in particular aspects of commercial property. And in terms of the park and the public realm, they probably already have significant conversations and have a team that can hopefully again be announced either at the same time or shortly afterwards. Just one key thing is that the first thing that the developer partner has to deliver is the museum square. So that's part of the competition. The infrastructure, as Neil said, being delivered by Homes England, with CISC on site now delivering that work. But Museum Square is one of the things that the developer partner has to deliver as part of their first phase of development.
Councillor Merritt, was it a supplementary question to that?
It relates to what Councillor Healy's just been saying. I was equally concerned about the lack of financial information, lack of risk information, and so on, which I would have thought was a prime function of corporate services scrutiny to ensure it is right. So I think when we do have the next reports, we certainly need to see and have, you know, proper accounting of that side of the situation. But it was Councillor Healy's point about the office market. I mean, we haven't just got a difficult situation with the office market post-COVID. We've also got the problem that the housing market is in some difficulty. House builders have significantly retrenched in terms of build rates. The Bank of England autumn Treasury statements clearly show very limited growth in incomes, which suggests that the housing market may be constrained for some time. So I suspect this development, perhaps that's why there's been delays in getting the thing signed. The finances and the timescales for rollout are probably going to be significantly different from those that were originally anticipated. So, you know, how much is, and with high interest rates for any borrowings, this project must be becoming rather more difficult than had been anticipated a few years ago. So I think we really do need to have better oversight on that, and more particularly of the risks for us as an authority in terms of when those commercial developments take place, how many extra years is that going to be? How many, you know, what's in effect the lost interest on all those extra years borrowings in terms of the equation for us, in terms of our element of this, but also obviously is important in terms of implications for the city, in terms of future jobs, future employment, future housing. And you know, we have a major housing crisis at the moment. So if there are significant delays likely, then that's a big challenge. Sorry, I'm speaking that direction instead of to the mic. Apologies. Right, I've said what I said.
Thank you. I'll ask Neil to respond. I think some of the risk elements will be covered by audit and governance. But yeah, we need to make sure that they are picked up.
in the relevant committee, and that this committee cited on them, but audit and governance is probably the best place for that very detailed risk analysis. But if you want to respond, Neil.
Yeah, well, at the risk of Councillor Eyre calling me an optimist again, I think, you know, City of York is an incredibly desirable place to be, having responsibility for the economic function as well for the authority. We got, you know, 40% plus of our residents have got a qualification higher than the degree. It's an incredibly desirable place to live, which puts us in that sort of dichotomy of having a housing crisis, because actually house prices have gone up so much because it is such a desirable place to live. So I think in terms of the housing development on York Central, I think there's a really high chance of that housing being delivered, and particularly since the major landowner is Homes England, who have currently got billions of pounds worth of central government money to get on and deliver housing. So I think from a city's perspective, housing delivery is absolutely bang centre and really important for us. But I think in terms of if there was another city in the north of England that was looking at a site like this with government backing and demand in the housing market, it's as good as it can get, considering what I do accept is the national and international headwinds that we face. In respect of business attractiveness of the city, again, from the perspective of the fact that we've got a government hub and a significant government hub being proposed on the site as effectively the anchor tenant, I can see it being an incredibly desirable place, as we've seen elsewhere, where government starts to make investment for other businesses to come and attract themselves and agglomerate around in terms of that government hub and the opportunity. And clearly, we've got the new combined authority on the horizon, which you know, members are very keenly aware of the opportunity that brings in terms of delivering additional money to the region. And York Central is going to sit at the heart of that. So clearly not my role to be a politician, but I think it is my role to support and lead on the economic function of the authority. And I think all of our later members is that the advice I'm getting is it's as good as you can get in York compared to the rest of the north of England.
Thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. Over the decades, the key aspect of getting investment on the site has been to overcome the problems of it being landlocked, and ensuring that those works that need to be continued are being done. Over the decades, the problem has been when significant changes are made to the design, and that incurs delay and additional costs. So switching the entrance from Water End to Chancery Rise and then back again, that wasn't helpful. And so I really want to understand those changes to those infrastructure requirements for road and for cycle access to the site, that they're being progressed. And then it's understanding the ongoing discussions about the government hub. So at one point it was going to be a replacement House of Lords, whilst there were, you know, it was speculated. But I think it's understanding the long-term sustainable government presence on that site, and having been in a lift with Jake Berry and saying, well, what are you doing to help us to deliver this site that everyone's been talking about for decades? I think it's understanding the commitment there to ensure that it is not just a token presence, but actually it is a full relocation of jobs to the site, to be that spark on this development, to really gain the interest that you need for what I hope is more benign sources of capital than has been speculated in the past.
Neil?
We'll do it in two parts. Just in terms of the the commitments to deliver the infrastructure that unlocks the site. It's contracted for. CISC are in contract to deliver that infrastructure into the site that unlocks the site. If government were to renege on that, they would have to pay significant financial penalties to CISC in terms of that contract. So I've got a very high degree of confidence that that will be delivered, and you can see that from some of the photos that's coming on site. As for the ancillary infrastructure, clearly the piece along the riverside, the members will be aware we were awarded the additional money through the Active Travel England earlier on in the year for the riverside, the additional £1 million. There's the £500,000 that you yourselves as members have made available for that. So I think there's again a high degree of confidence that the riverside walkway will be delivered. Do you want to touch upon the Wilton Rise piece, David?
Yeah, I suppose also you can put numbers to that. I mean, the £77 million of housing infrastructure grant that went to Homes England, that is the first tranche of money. There is £23 million of West Yorkshire Combined Authority transport funding. So there's £100 million. And then was the £35 million of EZ borrowing when that has been exhausted. So that's the commitment. And the reserve matters planning application for the infrastructure. Yeah, there are a few detailed changes going through the system at the moment, but that is what CISC are on site delivering at the moment. And the dates that are given in the update are the best information we have as to when we would see the first phase come forward next summer, and when we would see the completion of all works in 26. In terms of a government hub, it is frustrating that we do not have definitive answers, but what we can tell you is in January and March, the partners in association with the GPA had an exhibition here in West Offices and elsewhere in the city.
Sorry, because that's Councillor Aaron Healy to.
In January they were showing outlines of a built form to accommodate 2,500 staff, 16,000 square metres of accommodation. I think it was reduced very slightly by the March iteration. They were slightly less specific. That is the information that is out there in the public domain. We do not have any more information other than that the design work has been ongoing with the GPA. The design team have been having ongoing conversations in a pre-application way with the planning authority, and there is an expectation that planning application will be coming very shortly. But that is all that we have.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nichols.
Just a couple of questions. The HS2, I know it was in the slide, but my worry is how much consideration have you given to the changes that HS2 isn't coming up here? And we've now got Network North. So is that a threat or an opportunity? So what thinking has actually gone on since that announcement? And on the slide, you've got, like most sales, up to 2,500 new homes, up to 112,000 square metres, but you're guaranteeing 6,500 jobs because it's a plus. Is that just your optimism again, or is it a reason to be pessimistic about the up-tos, but optimism about the pluses, the 6,500 jobs? And you appear to be competing with Leeds on the jobs front in terms of professional services, insurance. If somebody goes to Leeds regularly, they've had a lot of cranes up for a long time. So are we trying to play catch up with them and with Manchester, who've also had a lot of cranes up for a long time?
So I suppose just on the rail, and then they'll talk about the jobs. So on the rail, the outline planning application allowed for 2 new platforms, land reserved at the rear of the station. That was always to do with Northern Powerhouse Rail rather than specifically HS2. HS2 was a possibility, I think, at the time. What we do know is there is a commitment to further rail infrastructure upgrades. Notification already gone out about work on a 3rd line leading north of York Station through to Skelton Junction, work ongoing over the Christmas period. I understand that that's actual work on the ground ahead of the funding being confirmed. So in terms of rail capacity, the scheme envisages up to two new platforms coming forward. and an investment in a third line to increase capacity on the network. But clearly, yes, we've already apologised. HS2 should have been taken out of the metrics as it would have been for Leeds or other places.
So in terms of the 2,500 homes per million square feet, they're in the planning. So well, they're in the plan. Well, they're also in the planning permission, so that's what's permitted. So there's a greater degree of confidence in them in being delivered. The reason there's an up to in specifically in the office space is that there's swing blocks allowed within the outline planning application. So that means that there's an allocation that they're allowed to put more housing on and less business development, depending upon the market conditions, and David will pick up on the specifics of what the volumes are, but it's it's millions the higher level, and it's somewhere around the 800,000 square feet for the de minimis, and that was based on the requirements that we felt that were necessary for the EZ to deliver the money to deliver the infrastructure, so the minimum level accommodates for that. In terms of are we competing for the jobs and is that a guaranteed figure? Clearly it isn't a guaranteed figure. We can't guarantee the number of jobs, particularly since market is changing dramatically. Is when is a job in York? Is it just because that's where your head office is and you're working from home 4 days a week? So there's a whole raft of things as what do jobs mean in terms of a specific location. But I think when you start to look at the commitments from government that they're proposing and gone public with in terms of the government hub, you can start to see that it's not a undeliverable figure when you consider the number of government jobs that are likely to be on York Central in terms of their own view of up to 2,500. I think the more interesting piece that you highlighted there in terms of are we in competition with Leeds and Manchester? Yes, we are, but we're also in competition with everywhere else in the world. You know, the where you operate is a function of where you can attract the talent to, and you know, I continually want to press that forward in every public opportunity we have, is that the ongoing commitment for the local plan, the delivery of the York Central, the front of station, the outer ring road, all of those investments that have been made make York an incredibly attractive place for people to come and live, but therefore in terms of the challenge in business at this moment in time globally is to attract talent. So coming to York is a great opportunity if you're a business out there looking for a place to be. York's the place to be because you'll get the talent. It will stay here because of the great school system, the great city you've got, and that's the narrative that sits behind York Central.
Do you want to pick up on the Network North point that Councillor Nichols made in terms of, is it bad news or good news?
I'll try not to stray into the politics. Network North, clearly a significant decision by central government. Clearly that is going to be shaped by governments because we're expecting a national election at some point within the next year. So what Network North actually manifests itself as, I think, is a moot point. Clearly, from the perspective of the York, because we're sat here in the Hudson Room, a huge amount of the rail infrastructure in the north of England relies on coming through York. We currently got about 6% of the rail traffic in the north of England comes through York. It's something like only, if you combine Leeds and York together, for example, we have more rail traffic coming through those two centres than Manchester and Liverpool combined. So we are significantly above our weight. It's in the order of about 10 million rail users a year come through York. So we're significantly above our weight when you compare ourselves to any other city of our size. So investment through Network for the North, I think wherever it happens on the East Coast Main Line, East-West, in terms of it's going to benefit York.
Thank you. Councillor Steels-Walshaw and then Councillor Taylor. I will bring you back in.
Thank you, Chair. I echo Councillor Taylor and Widdowson's thoughts around the feelings that we have seen most of this before, and I think what what we've seen and heard tonight is that there is quite significant delays to everything. And I think that's what we're hearing, that's residents' concerns. They're not knowing, like the road was meant to be stopped up in January, but that's significantly delayed now. And I think what would be really useful is if we could have something around a timetable of delays and when things were happening. There's no clear plan on when the Riverside's going to start and around the housing. There seems to be delays to that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, as Councillor Fenton suggested, when you get a developer partner appointed, that'll be the opportunity for members to interrogate them as to their timetable of delivery ambition, because clearly that will be their investment profile, and how quickly things are brought forward will be heavily driven by themselves. In terms of the Riverside Walkway, that is money that is in control of the authority, so that will be a member decision as to how that's prioritised within the delivery programme.
Yeah, no, I would certainly hope that the lead developer would be willing to come and talk to not just members of this committee, but I'm sure members in the communities directly affected by the development as well. Was that a supplementary, Councillor Widdowson? Okay, if you hold that thought. Councillor Taylor, would you like to pose your remaining questions, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think I'd like to press a bit more on this claim around 6,500 high value jobs. There's been a lot of slogans surrounding this project, including how the NRM is going to inspire the engineers of the future by building over Lehman Road. And people have bought some of those lines, hook, line and sinker. But I think this claim around 6,500 high value jobs is massive. And I know that the government hub plays a part in that. And I think you might have said that you'd estimate around 2,500 jobs on site within that number. So I'm thinking that still leaves around 4,000. We're between, and I know you can't bank on it as certain because it's impossible to predict the future, but we're between that being a bankable figure and it just being pure marketing to try and get momentum behind this project. Where are we within those two things on that figure? And I'll do the next two questions now, and then I'll shut up then. Thank you. Wilton Rise Bridge. That's something that I think everyone's looking forward to. It's one of the more I don't know, there's a unanimous will to have that bridge redeveloped because it's not very nice as it currently is. And it'd be good to know when the community might be able to expect some of the pre-planning engagement that we've seen with other phases of York Central in the last year or two. Because as much as it's wanted, it's not straightforward, as I know you guys know. So it'd be good to have a bit more information on that. And I think my final question is, what lessons would you say you've learned in terms of how this development has been communicated to and engaged with in terms of local residents? You know, it's not been plain sailing over the last 4 or 5 years. I know some of it people support, and most people want the whole project delivering, but there's key details within it which haven't always been, you know, easy going. There's been a lot of community fallout with the Lehman Road issue. So looking back on all of that, what do you think the council and the partnership specifically should do differently moving forward, given those experiences?
Thank you. So we've got the point around the 6,500 jobs and how realistic that is. Update on Wilton Rise Bridge. Any pre-planning engagement that might be planned, and any lessons learned.
I'll do the first one, let David do the second one, and I'll think about the third one as David's talking. In terms of optimism on the figures, all I would reflect is that the authority employs around 2,400 staff, and we're currently occupying just one floor of this building. Clearly there's Hazel Court as well. There's a predominant, and we have smaller outlier areas, but you've got, when we built this building, we were looking at 1,700 plus staff on all 3 floors. They now account for just one floor. So for me, the potential for York Central is many, many more thousands of jobs than are actually predicted in terms of our capacity globally. So to a certain degree, has York got the potential now in a new world to deliver huge numbers of jobs? Absolutely. Will it? Well, if I had a crystal ball like that, I wouldn't be sat here. But I think the opportunity, the quality of place, etc., the stuff that I've propagated has sort of been responsible for attracting investment in the city. To the extent that I continually have discussions with developers, they see York as a great place to invest certainly in terms of the north of England, but in the UK as a whole as well. So that would be my view on the opportunity and the potential for the job numbers. Over to David on the Wilton.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think LNDR is probably another good example. I mean, just moved into West offices. I think it's something like 600 head count, but they've got 200 desk spaces. So if that ratio plays out, the opportunity at York Central is perhaps even greater. Wilton Rise Bridge. So I think there's been a lot of design work done. There was a presentation to the strategic board, which the leader of the council attends, as Neil said, and it is absolutely the developer's intention to bring forward options for public engagement before any planning application is made. They wanted to develop options and assess those internally first, and officers have already had early sight of those through the pre-application process. They'll take the comments that have been given and then come forward through the normal process, through a process of public engagement. They're already committed to that. I think just to give Neil a couple of more moments, I think, Chair, perhaps just going back to the beginning, I know that partners who were invited to attend this evening and couldn't, there are genuine reasons why the representatives of the partners were not able to be here this evening. And I appreciate that it's not to attend the Scrutiny Committee, but the lead member meeting, which is in the diary for the 7th of December, they will be attending that. That's been in the diary since the September meeting. So hopefully there can be some further communication if there is any new information available. And I know they very much hope that there will be by that date, but it is only just over a week away.
Neil?
Here we go. So I think I'd refer to Councillor Waller's comments earlier that, York Central have been on the cards for 40 or 50 years. So in terms of reflecting of the things that have got us to where we are today, I think the reflection that bringing Network Rail, Homes England, the NRM and ourselves together, and every single one of those partners had the opportunity at any point during the delivery process to effectively put the whole scheme on a hold and see it never happen again for another generation. The need to effectively reflect the priorities and ambitions of all those partners, I think, could have been better reflected to the public during that period of the last 4 to 5 years. And the fact that they are competing interests associated with those partners. We couldn't have delivered York Central without the NRM. The NRM has ambitions in terms of its objectives as effectively a body delivering on behalf of society as a major UK charity. Network Rail has ambitions in respect of its infrastructure, its estate, and the same in terms of Homes England. So I think reflecting the complexity of delivering on behalf of all the partners, I think is a key piece. In terms of the big issues over the last, certainly since the outline planning application was delivered, I think it's the sheer slow pace of central government decision making compared to the agility which local authorities and local government show in this country. I think is a real reflection for actually more devolution, because after that grant of money was awarded to Homes England, we seem to go into a period of a real long hiatus, well, a year's hiatus in delivering the funding, another multiple years hiatus in terms of the delivery and getting on with it. So I think the sheer sort of frustration of the central government decision making to get on and deliver at pace is another thing that I would reflect on those last 4 to 5 years. I would, however, look at it through a more optimistic lens, because I'm here paying as the optimist tonight, is that they've taken on board a huge amount of risk on the central government balance sheet compared to what we would have had if we'd been delivering it.
And from what you said on pre-planning engagement, will that have to wait for the?
It's a sort of supplementary. But
Will that have to wait for the lead developer to be?
In terms of each one of the reserve matters applications, there'll be more engagement throughout the process, and I'm expecting, in terms of the major developer partner, we would want to have an engagement. I'm sure the new administration will want to have an engagement with them, actually start to articulate a greater sort of sense of vision and place. And what does it, and Councillor Walshaw said, you know, what does it mean for local residents? What are the bits, and when can they expect to see them delivered?
Was that a supplementary?
Just a closing correction, if I may, Chair, and then I will leave it, because I'm tiring myself out. I think first thing to say is it's disappointing that in that sort of answer about what would we do differently now, having looked back on the last 4 or 5 years, the main reflections seem to be around local government's apparent agility compared to central. I mean, that's the first time I've heard local government described as agile, but you might well be right, Neil, to be fair. And also communications around the partners' priorities. I think there's more fundamental issues that the partnership still haven't really digested, and I include the council in that. And it's just a shame to still not see a recognition of that. But my correction, if I may, Chair, is I don't think it's accurate to say that York Central couldn't have been delivered without the Railway Museum. It's York Central as is could not be delivered without the Railway Museum. And the outline planning application still allowed for some flexibility around what we do have in front of us. I'm only raising that because it annoys me, because it's been said over the years, oh, it can't change, this is how it's got to be, and it's absolute nonsense. And there's always been rumblings that the outline application may be revisited in the future, but it just seems to be awkward when residents ask for that to be revisited. But if someone else might want it, different ball game. So yeah, let's see what happens in the coming years. It's going to be interesting.
Okay, Councillor Eyre. I've got Councillor Burton, so Councillor Eyre.
No problem. A couple of quick comments. I welcome your optimism about house prices, etc. The housing market in York, Neil. It's a shame it wasn't here a couple of months ago when you were talking about Castle Mills and telling us how awful the housing market was in York. The second comment is around those jobs and the allocation of government hubs. Obviously, if offices close elsewhere in the city to move those jobs to the site on York Central, then we don't actually get a net increase in business rates from that. So be mindful of that one. So the quick questions, page 6, in terms of the list of future dates that come through, there's no mention at all of any housing planning applications coming through prior to 2027. Is that a belief that there will not be any housing planning applications coming forward before spring 2027? On page 19, in reference to York Station frontage, that's predominantly around phase 1. Could you give us an update on phase 2 in terms of the new road layout and changes to parking spaces, and whether funding and replacement parking has been agreed? And the last one was on page 20, which touches on some of the comments that Councillor Taylor was making. Have there been any further conversations since May regarding any changes to access through NRM and revisiting the walkways agreement, or any changes to any of the layout regards road access through Lehman Road, etc.?
So that was timeline for housing on site, phase 2 of station frontage, and any plans changes around the sort of NRM Lehman Road arrangements.
Okay, so on housing, there isn't anything, because I think it's always very dangerous, but I feel quite confident that if the project director were here, there are a number of things that when a developer is announced, he believes that there will be some fairly upfront statements that this is not the question of the developer being announced and then saying, right, now we'll go away about and think what we want to do. He believes that they will be able to come forward with some fairly open statements about what they hope to deliver. The reason it's not on there is we don't know, and it is not for us to say the dates on there are things that we know about.
You put commercial dates in, that would thing. Otherwise, if there was no dates at all, I would have said it.
So-
So there's dates that you anticipate in commercial.
So,
So
we
are you,
have
but the
been-
simple question, are you anticipating housing applications coming before 2027?
So the January 27 date is the date that Homes England are giving us on the basis of their conversations with the developer partners about the first commercial office development opening. So that will be open with workers.
Okay.
It says first, so the planning application to come December 2023.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
you've had this conversation. If you have confidence in when the commercial is coming forward in terms of next month.
Yeah.
Do you have any confidence that any housing applications, as just applications?
We haven't
not
had
housing?
any conversations about housing, about when they might come forward.
So just pick up the other points quickly because I'm conscious of time.
So
Yeah.
station frontage.
So in terms of station frontage, phase 2, there is an intrinsic link with the car parking and the multi-storey car park that's in the planning application. We've got ongoing discussions with DFT, and I think we've got a good way forward in terms of, and it will be subject to an executive report, I think, first quarter next year. A good arrangement with DFT in respect of the multi-storey car park provision, which was identified as a funding challenge within that next phase. I think in terms of the land valuation, land transfer, I think that's all pretty much, we know where we're going with that. I think there's an overall position where we just need to understand what happens with the displaced parking during construction is probably the outstanding matter.
So the MSCP remains in the plans?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's got in the planning permission. That's the expectation of the rail
The exec
industry.
members always, for transport, always opposed it.
Hang on. This isn't a conversation.
So the final point was on the NRM and the layout. So there's a minor amendment to the layout of Lehman Road, which has gone through planning. Forgive me, I forget the detail, but it's on the planning portal. So that's from the existing Lehman Road where it gets stopped up into the to the rear of the new central hall. In terms of any other changes, the leader of the council, deputy leader of the council, met with the director of the NRM last week, I believe, and made a request for improved access through the museum over and above opening hours.
I think again, just to reflect on the decisions, clearly all the decisions in terms of the delivery of the reserve matters application were decisions taken by members following consultation, and a compromise is effectively what you see on the ground. The walkways agreement, the operating hours of the walkways agreement is still subject to ongoing discussion between the council and the NRM, but they are as awarded, they are as agreed now in terms of the council's regulatory position and that of the NRM, but clearly ongoing discussions because effectively the operating hours of access and the nature of that access is something that can be changed during the operation phase. And I envisage over the decades, hopefully, that the NRM continues to operate after it's fully built out. There will be, I am sure, numerous changes in how that is operated over time.
Okay. Got two more hands and then we will bring this item to a close. Councillor Burt.
Thank you. I know we were talking earlier about local residents and prioritising them and also attracting businesses and progressive organisations want diversity and inclusion. Therefore, they'll do business with a lot of other companies these days. I know that from my prior work. So I'd hope that we could prioritise disabled inclusion within all of these schemes. Because that would be a big attraction point for York, to make York a much more attractive place to visit for disabled people and to live. So I'd hope that not only would the housing be affordable, it would be inclusive and accessible as well, and that would be taken into consideration, because I don't see really, you know, HS2 is here, but there's not an awful lot around disabled people who are making up about 20% of the population, either, you know, disabled people who are younger or older people who will become, you know, who will have impairments. So I think really the point is, let's forget about those parts of the population. Let's encompass them, let's bring them in, let's celebrate it, and let's also think about perhaps you were talking about changing things for that big business would change things where smaller people can't do so. The station frontage as it is going to pose a lot of problems for people travelling who can't walk far, because the bus stops and the taxis and the shelter is all not there anymore. We're going from good to worse. And I think if we could look at that again, wouldn't be a bad thing, because it's welcome to York. You're not going to stay dry if you can't walk fast. I can't walk fast. I get wetter than you probably would do on a rainy day. And that's the same with other people like myself. So I think really, you know, floating bus stops as well around the station frontage. I think, to me, they're a bit like smart motorways, to be honest. I've got off buses in London to nearly be absolutely crushed by bicycles whizzing past. I know that's not what we're focusing on here, but just let's bear it in mind in all of this. There's a lot of things to think of. I know probably sound like a broken record on this, but I don't think there's an awful lot of other people thinking about what it's like for 25% of the population in York. I know that it's a key strategy for the Labour administration, but I think it's good to bring it up at places like this. And I do think about other things, but I've heard a lot of things discussed that I would have talked about, but I think this has been a bit lost tonight. So please let's remember this.
Okay. No, thank you. David?
Thank you, Councillor Burton. I mean, I think just to respond, York Central offers a fantastic opportunity where, you know, adapting historic cities is often very challenging, but building new to modern standards offers an opportunity which isn't available in certain circumstances. And I know, you know, the council now has an access officer, and the focus groups that have been set up through the city. There's been significant input already into the Museum Square application as an example, to make sure it is the most inclusive and accessible space that it can be. Again, accepting that even then there are still some constraints in terms of vehicle crossings, bus stops, pedestrian and cycle linkages, different flows of people. But I think, you know, on housing, clearly, you know, there are mandated standards, as we've said before, working with Homes England, the National Housing Delivery Body, looking at you know, the affordable housing and the social housing. We should look to go not just to the standards, but above and beyond if we can. And you know, there's a commitment in terms of, you know, the council officer position to push as hard as we can.
Thank you. Yes.
Just to say as well, within a lot of new developments, there's very little parking by the houses. So if you're a visitor to someone in a new development, like the Chocolate Works, for instance, it's really hard to get there. I have a friend who moved from there because they couldn't, you know, they couldn't have the visitors and their parking space. Because if you're visiting someone and you're disabled and you can't walk or wheel or whatever a long distance, you need to be quite near. And I think I understand the need to have fewer cars and to use fewer cars, but if you can't avoid it, then there has to be thought of inclusion of those people.
I'm sure when we get to reserve matters, planning applications, there'll be those discussions I'm sure will be had.
Thank you.
Last question, Councillor Widdowson, briefly, and then a brief response, and then we'll move on.
It's actually more of a statement than a question, so do with it what you would. Gentlemen, what you presented tonight is a lifetime away from what you actually wrote. Right, so you've got all the details, you've got all the information, you know what's going on. What you've verbally gone through is a really good update. So you've shown us the split of the money, how the different bits work, whether it's the business rates or whether it's Home England actually getting the money with, I forgot now, you know, Home England's getting that money, the 100 million back. You've talked about where we're going to get the jobs from. You've talked about when the homes are going to come on the stream. You've spoken about the rail link, and I know there's an issue with one of them that is curved. Can they have two or one? Only if it can be curved. You've talked about the green spaces. You've even given us a bit of detail on the timelines. If we could have had that update, this would have been a much more positive meeting, because I actually think that York Central is fantastic and will really, really change the city. We'll have thousands of new jobs. We've got thousands of new homes getting there. We've got better connectivity across the city. This update didn't do it justice and give people the opportunity to see it as such a fantastic project. So thank you for the details that we got in the meeting.
And I'm sure we will be returning to this project in the not too distant future. In terms of, and I'm happy to be guided by Neil and David as to what I don't want to do is say, come back in 3 months if there's really nothing more to tell us. I'm sure we will all keep an eye on developments in terms of appointment of the lead developer and what statements they might come out with. I would hope if you have the opportunity in discussions with those individuals and organisations that you can impress on them how they would benefit from coming to talk to members and enthusing us and engaging with us to get behind their vision. So I'm happy to be guided by officers in terms of when another meaningful update would make sense to come back to this committee. But thank you for your time and fielding a barrage of questions. I think they were all really good questions, and I think demonstrates there's an appetite on behalf of members to understand more, to be as well briefed as we can be, because residents will expect that of us. I don't know if you want to make any final comments.
I think, Chair, thank you. I think the calendar shows a further update in March, and I say as long as we're not subject to delays that we're not in control of, I suspect other partners might want to be here sooner than that. But let's leave that March date in the diary and actually plan for it, and we'll talk to partners and see where we are, because time does go by quite quickly, quite close to Christmas, so March perhaps feels like a good time.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would just reiterate that I think if we've not got a development partner by March, you'll want to scrutinise us and the partners as to why we've not got a development partner by, because as Councillor Eyre pointed out, the clock is ticking and it's going to be a significant issue for us and for the partners in that regard. And I think just in respect of the areas that you wish to cover for the next discussion, will liaise with yourself, Chair, so that we try and meet Councillor Widdowson's expectations, but equally reflect that what the resources and the time that officers got to write everything down is very limited at this moment.
We may want a more sort of focused discussion if we identify a small number of key issues that
thank you, Chair,
that are of interest, but rather than making cover the whole thing again. But thank you for your time and your contribution. You're free to stay, or you're also free to leave. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 4. This is, sorry, Councillor Merritt.
Yes, Chair. The paper that we've had has, I think, over half of the actions not completed in the schedule that was sent out.
I was just going to ask Dawn to introduce the paper. Sorry.
Could I suggest we defer this item to give time for a more comprehensive report to be produced, and then time for us to read it rather than trying to deal with something
Colin's
late reissue.
Sorry, can members, can we focus on having one meeting? That's fine. People have places to be, that's fine. If we can just, sorry, councillor Merritt.
Yeah. And I know that there's an update, but frankly, none of us will have the time to read it properly at this point in the meeting. So I think we best deferred.
Okay.
So that we do have a fully comprehensive report and time to consider it beforehand.
If I can ask Dawn to introduce a paper, and then we can
Chair.
decide what we want to do with it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So the paper is following the format that we've recently presented updates on progress against council motions in for a couple of years now to this committee. You had an update last in January this year. On average, they've been coming every 6 months for a couple of years. So we're slightly outside of that, probably as a result of the election, I suspect. But so this is the first one since January earlier this year. There are a couple of gaps, I think, one of which we are filling now because we've had an update from Pauline's team on the motion that you've been tabled with. It's not, no disrespect, councillor, it's not that long, the update, it's a paragraph. So you might have time to look at that in this particular meeting. Of course, you're at liberty to defer it if you wish to do so. I'm not sure how much more you're going to gain in that timescale, but you may gain, because I think there's about one missing otherwise. Most of it's actually complete, I think, in terms of the updates via CMT officers. By that, I mean council management team officers.
I mean, we'll talk about the schedule of petitions separately. I think I'm conscious that when pulling this report together, democratic services are dependent on the service areas to provide the information to actually populate the table. So it's certainly no reflection on your efforts to pull this together, but just for the avoidance of doubt. I think there are, I mean, so from my looking at it, some of the the actions taken column are more fulsomely completed for some motions than others. Some of the updates are sort of fairly rudimentary. So I think there are quite a number of gaps in addition to the
24 blank boxes.
to the update that we have received.
Blank boxes.
And I am conscious that we haven't looked at this properly since January. And there have been council meetings between now and then, and so it may be that some officers have perhaps got out of the habit of thinking, having on their to-do list, I must check progress with implementation of the motion agreed at council. So I'm glad we've seen it, because we now understand where the gaps are and what needs to happen. Councillor Eyre.
I think I'm largely in agreement with what Councillor Merritt was saying. I think it's difficult for democratic services. That's one of the questions that I was going to ask, was around the highways maintenance one, which says that there's a report coming to executive in spring. I was interested in that report, but there's no way in the world you're going to know the answers to that particular question anyway. It would need James to be here. So I think there's a bit of work needs doing with this in terms of clarity. I said to Stephen before me, I'm not a big fan of RAG ratings, but this is definitely something that does lend itself to a RAG rating of actually saying, yes, all of these actions have been completed. These ones haven't. I think there needs to be a bit more clarity somewhere in those actions where actions have been taken on certain parts and not other parts, and not being too disingenuous on someone where actions are actually just a load of waffles, don't really mean anything, but talking around the situation, not looking at the highway, want it to be considered as part of a future review of highway infrastructure as much as that. So it's just how we actually look at that, so we can highlight down to what particular actions have been taken. I think so. I'm also intrigued as to why it only I'm new to the committee, so why it only goes back to, it says to the beginning of the year, but actually goes back to December 2022. But I know there are motions, the traffic in the city walls, which is due to be completed by December 23, for example, historical motions that still haven't been implemented, which aren't captured in this either. So I think that needs to be considered in terms of that one. I was rapidly looking to see whether I would agree with Councillor Merritt's point on deferral, but unfortunately, page 71 of my agenda has disappeared. Therefore, I can't see what the work plan is to decide whether or not there is scope on the work plan to defer it to a further meeting.
Potentially. I mean, in terms of this paper, it is for us to note in the interest of transparency, and obviously we can comment and we can say when it next comes round, we would want, well, obviously we would want it to be as complete as possible. And I think where there is an empty box, I'd be inclined to say, and it's where it's because a service area hasn't provided an update, then that should appear there in terms of no information on implementation plans was provided. So at least we know, if we know that there is a risk that some motions are there's not an intention to implement, then we've got kind of clarity on that, and then we can pick that up with relevant service areas. So I think I'm happy to note the report and obviously note concerns raised by Councillor Merritt and Councillor Eyre. I don't think there's really much for us to defer other than we can defer noting it, but that would seem a bit pointless. Councillor Nichols.
So just my ignorance, but when a motion is passed, there's absolutely no timeline whatsoever, because get me home safely, which I remember, it's one of my first meetings. It's quite an important one, but it just appears on this blank page that, like, screw you basically, and the yes minister's taken over and no one's doing anything. I'm just at a loss to know why we're passing motions to be ignored. I thought the power laid with the council, but am I just being naive? Am I?
Councillor Nichols, I won't comment on the comment you've just made about why you're passing council motions to be ignored, but I will say it very much, some of it very much depends on the wording of the motion, which of course comes from yourselves. So depending on how tight you make the wording of that motion, and it then ultimately becomes agreed by council, will depend upon how it is therefore responded to. So some motions clearly, and the vast majority will come with no deadline within them. Some are implicit because it might be in response to a government consultation or an ongoing initiative, and others just aren't firm at all. Therefore, you get into a potential scenario of the kind that perhaps Nigel was alluding to earlier when he was saying there are historic motions, and we've presented to you for the sake of, shall we say, being able to deal with the, what's before you, the progress that have been held on motions since this report was last considered. But I have no doubt that if we went back, there will be some on a list from 2020, 2019 that you might find there has been no progress update on, because it very much depends on the wording in the motion itself to some extent.
Councillor Myers and then Councillor Ely.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Nichols, they do get ignored. That's the but Don explained why, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to try to challenge where we don't agree. And I've not been on this committee before, and some of my motions have not gone anywhere because of wording issues. And I think we should be reasonable around this table to push back where appropriate. So thanks for getting me home safely. I'm really proud of that motion, and I want to see it enacted. So thank you, Chair.
I think that's a good point, and I think it's the more specific and time limited we can make the wording of resolutions, the easier it is for this committee to then sort of hold officers to account for delivery. So I think it's a point well made. Councillor Healy. Microphone.
Thank you, Chair. Super quickie, slightly tangential. Will the Lord, so this is page 9, Safeguarding York's Future. Will the Lord Mayor be given that entire spiel at every council meeting about how many days there are until the 1st of January 2023?
Yeah. So if you were listening Thursday last week, you gave that spiel.
So he's going to do that at every council meeting. He's not just going to say there are 200 days until.
No, he's going to do it every time in terms of countdown.
That's a council motion that has been implemented. Councillor Eyre.
That's what I was going to say, Jay, because I don't think it actually has. because I've looked at it again, but that's why I think we as a committee, as we all are common to do with minutes of meetings in terms of actions that we're happy to close, I think we need to be able to close some things that won't happen. So that one, for example, I thought, but it does actually say the executive and all executive member decision sessions will have exactly the same spiel at all of those meetings. I don't think executive did, and I don't think executive member decision sessions have. So that motion hasn't actually been implemented.
Well,
But I don't want to leave this on here every 3 months to check and then go, well, actually, only 80% of the meetings did that actually occur in. So it needs to be closed, because you can't actually close it without constantly monitoring it for a life cycle until 2030, but it's not something that we need to be routinely checking on.
That is true. And I would liken this to some of you that have been doing scrutiny for quite a long time on this authority will remember the process that we used to have in place for scrutiny recommendations. So when scrutiny reports had gone to the executive, and the executive would say yay or nay, and if they said yay, the relevant scrutiny committee would then monitor the actions and the recommendations and would physically tick them off or sign them off. This is slightly different because I think there is some ambiguity, for want of a better phrase, as to just how much control you have over this, because these are motions agreed by council, therefore, and then the implementation thereof rests with officers ultimately. Therefore, this report is actually here for you in terms of the content of this annex is here for you for information. I think you can legitimately comment on the process, though, in terms of how you receive that information.
I think it's how we capture those important things, like Nicholas and Councillor Myers said, the things about those motions that we really want to make sure are implemented and we want to be massive on, whereas other things like, did the political assistant send a letter to the relevant minister following the meeting, are, well, obviously very, very important, not quite necessarily the type of thing that we would want to be focusing on at scrutiny.
Yeah. So I think in terms of presentation, I think that's a fair point in terms of indicating whether, because some of the council resolves bits are so long, you almost have to subdivide it in terms of these elements have been completed, these elements are ongoing because this will be picked up in a report to the executive on X date. So yeah, I think in terms of, and as you say, there's a separate debate, probably not for us to have, as well, why haven't you done that? That can be picked up through other routes. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of coming back to this committee, if you can leave it with the chair and vice chair to look at other things on the agenda and talk with democratic services and work out when might be a good time for this to come back rather than set a date now. So what I don't come back is to have another discussion on something in a similar format that attracts a similar range of comments. So if you're happy to leave that to the chair and vice chair in consultation with democratic services. Councillor Waller? No. Okay. So agenda item 5, it's another table to look at, and this is a table of petitions. Councillor Burton?
Sorry, I have an interest to declare because I was involved in one of the petitions.
I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay. I just wanted to be
that's
transparent.
That's fine. I think if we go down that route, we've all been involved in either presenting petitions or signing petitions, or we'll take it as a blanket dispensation. So in terms of agenda item 5, this is the log of petitions. Dawn, is there anything you'd like to say in relation to this?
There's nothing I want to ask the chair, to the report chair. It's I think again you last received this in January earlier this year. So periodically you receive an update on the petitions received. The vast majority of petitions that the council receives tend to come from yourselves actually and go through council, but there are, however, other routes in terms of directly into the council, few and far between, but they should all be recorded in terms of the petitions received on the petition schedule. Again, you'll notice the trend is that the vast majority, for those members that are newer to the committee, tend to be in Neil Verity's area. And your role with these in the past has been basically, are you happy with the progress that's being made or the actions that have been taken in relation to the petition since it was referred by full council. There has been some confusion about that, and I think we dealt with that last time we had a debate, about this at committee, I think, and obviously there are some members new to it, but the idea is for you to look at the route that those petitions have taken and any actions that have been agreed or put in place, and see whether you are satisfied or whether you want to comment further, have a debate about said petition here, etc. There are various options in the report, but yes.
Yeah, so thank you, and I think the way I see it is it would only be by exception we would want to have a debate about any of the particular petitions if we thought it was of such significance and perhaps wasn't being given the attention it perhaps warranted. It's really us to make sure that where a petition, people work hard to collect signatures to submit a petition, that it is actually being taken seriously. And this sets out what our current understanding is in relation to the petitions currently in the system. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Very similar comments to the ones I made last time in terms of, I think at the moment, this doesn't really allow us to see what is particularly outstanding and what has actually been closed and completed off. So if a similar piece of work could happen again, the same comments about officers not being here. So there is one particular one I'd like to ask a question of, but the officer isn't here. So that isn't something we can direct you. But then there's also that sort of strange thing, and I think Councillor Healy's just noticed it. So for example, on page 63, there's the reference to the petition on the Noddle Hill lay-by, which says that there will be a report which will be discussed in private, and it says to be received here on the 27th of the 11th. Well, there is no report, there is no discussion in private. There's quite a few things that could sort of say, well, it's coming to this meeting, therefore that's the conclusion of the process. Well, it isn't. As Councillor Fenton said, this meeting isn't the conclusion of the petition process. This meeting is here to say that petition has gone to the right person has looked at it, has either said, yes, I'm going to do something, or no, I'm not going to do it. That's all we should be monitoring, but there's quite a few like that, which seem to suggest that it's coming to here at this very meeting. There's quite a few listed as the one that safeguarding data is coming to. So it's just writing, oh, we've put it on the table for CSMC on the 27th. Doesn't mean anything's happened to the petition.
No, and sorry, in response to that, Councillor Eyre, I think, yes, that's the wording in the final comment column where, because that is, the information is completed again by the directorates and we receive the schedule. And actually that is a misunderstanding, and we've been around that one before, because you're absolutely right. You don't, because the council standing orders say that the petitions must be referred to this committee, and I think that's where one of the issue arises. They do come here, but in the format of the schedule. In other words, they're put onto the schedule. The petitions themselves will be dealt with by the relevant decision maker. And I think...
See, as I remember,
yeah,
Councillor Wallace probably the only person that was around at the time. The original intention of this was that the petitions went from full council to scrutiny to what was the Central Scrutiny Committee at the time, for them to then say, right, these are the roots of all those, and then to be able to close it off. That was the original intention, because there was long conversations that things happened and nothing ever happened. So scrutiny got involved to say, well, actually all the petitions will come to scrutiny. Scrutiny will say, right, that goes there, 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 and it's done. But
that is not how it's ever been done at CSMC. It might have been the intention in conversations that were had outside of the committee.
And
but
the last thing, while I
that's
reminisce, didn't we have a thing where if there's over 1,000 signatures, it triggered a full council? Because there's one on here with 1,000 that hasn't gone to full council debate.
No, because that doesn't exist anymore. So what happened was, part of the changing at that time within the constitution was to remove that provision, because obviously that took up considerable council time, but it gives you the authority to, if you feel that any of the petitions that are listed in the schedule would warrant a debate because you're not happy with here, say if there were over 1,000 signatories, or if you weren't happy with the work that was scheduled to take place, or the consideration.
You should tell me that, Don, because now I'm going to recommend at least 14 of these to full council debate.
That was how that was enacted, that particular provision. So you would have the right to have that consideration here at committee.
Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important to be able to track these petitions, because full councils happens so infrequently. It used to be the first Monday of every month apart from August. And therefore there was ample opportunity to do it that way. But with so long a gap on issues that can arise, that there does need to be the mechanism to put it into the system. But to be able to track it in this way is important.
So, picking up Councillor Wright's point around if a petition is over a certain certain size, as a committee, we can resolve to discuss that issue here. That's entirely within our gift. You know, we control the work plan. We can say, we think the size of that petition warrants if it's an issue that on which there is going to be a decision, it could count as pre-decision scrutiny. It's entirely up to us for members to propose items to be added to the agenda, and then collectively we can decide. You may or may not be successful. But I think in terms of what we've got here today, I think there's a number of ways in which we could look at the presentation in terms of, clearly, if we're getting slightly sketchy information from the service areas, I mean, it's dangerous to start paraphrasing what they're telling you, because then you might be misinterpreting what you might look at it and think, well, it doesn't really address the issue that the petition related to, but that's what they've told us, therefore that's what we'll report back. So maybe we can, and I'm happy to sit down and have a think and have a look at it in terms of how it might be presented in a way so it's more apparent to members of this committee the status of a particular issue. Councillor Myers?
Yeah, I think that's useful, Chair, and support that. I just feel that a lot of petitions just kind of get rolled into a bit of a dusty corner, and actually residents do want to know what's happened, and quite often it takes so long that they just maybe either not interested, or the issue's gone away, or people have gone away, etc. It just, some of them, quite a lot of them, end up going nowhere. So if you can bring greater focus and pull in greater knowledge from different service areas, I'd really, really support that.
No, I know sometimes that looking at this one about a particular petition was mentioned in a report, and I suppose whether you consider that is sufficient respect being given to the work that was put into if a report just notes a petition but then doesn't say, and these were the issues raised, and this is why either we've discounted the issue raised, or why we say yes, a point has been raised which is valid and we're doing this differently. I think it's up to kind of all of us to look at some of these agreed actions and track back and think, well, has it really been given due consideration in a report that's gone to either executive or executive member decision session saying, yeah, there was a petition, but we haven't acted on it, but these are the reasons why. At least as a petitioner, you would know what that is. And I think that's what we're perhaps missing, whether it's including a link to the report that is being referenced under the action agreed. If the service areas tell us, don't just say, oh, it's been covered in a report. Well, give me the link, tell me the paragraph number, so I can see and residents can see what you did on the back of that petition, which is, if nothing, then why nothing? So I think there's a lot more granular information we can put in here.
I think that's fair comment, Chair. And I think one of the things to perhaps remember is that prior to COVID, you used to get this report as a committee more frequently. So whilst the committee met bi-monthly, for those of you, I'm looking around the table, maybe Justine, maybe the chair who were involved in it would see this report very frequently, because you would see it every other month, basically. And that would have also at a time when, as an organisation, we had separate scrutiny officers who, whilst they were never responsible for preparing this annex, as it comes from the service directorates, as the chair mentioned earlier, would nonetheless be able to be regularly on the case. So the information you would be getting will be more immediate. Now it feels a little bit whoa, feels a little bit far away. I appreciate that because you've not had this since January. And that's in part down to a capacity within democratic services or lack thereof, because we don't have dedicated scrutiny officers currently. Please don't start that conversation from outside this room. But you know, so in terms of where you are in receiving the information, it's not quite as immediate as it used to be. And I think we can look at some of the
and I think now we're all familiar, we've kind of got our heads around what this is and what perhaps it could be, to make it kind of more accessible and informative for us in terms of, you know, clearly identifying if there's a big issue, you know, either a council motion or a petition on which there doesn't seem to be any kind of action or response, then yeah, we can, I'm sure we would all individually go into bat with the relevant director or assistant director and say, what's going on? You know, we can all do that. Councillor Healy, do you have a question?
Statement question. Thank you, Chair. Summoning the voice and spirit of a regular contributor to all of scrutiny. This probably just goes to sort of show and indicate just how the council and how it runs now isn't really responsive to petitions, to council motions. The juggernaut just seems to roll on, and no matter, I think a point was made up earlier about public consultation, there doesn't seem to be any sort of acknowledgement from this body, this council that we have, that it's here to deliver a public service. And you have councillors elected at the top and you have residents at the bottom. Whenever people seem to try and interact with the council, it just does seem to get lost. And I think these two reports just indicate that is so.
I would disagree with the point about not delivering a public service. I think I think invariably when resources are stretched and prioritization is undertaken, but that's not to say that petitions and council motions should be ignored. And I don't think they are being ignored. I think we've just got out of the habit of service areas knowing, right, I need to update my log of petitions, in terms of what actions I've taken and in terms of council motions. So I think if we as a committee can say, we're interested in this stuff because it's one of the few areas where there's sort of a direct link in terms of residents saying, this is what we care about, either through backing a council motion or signing a petition, is kind of re-establishing the profile of some of this stuff, which I think has slipped off the radar. I don't think it's a kind of a conscious decision on the part of officers. We're going to consciously not engage with this kind of stuff because we haven't had this discussion since January, and during COVID, everything kind of went on hold. We have got out of the habit, but that's something that, you know, we're now familiar with it. We know what we'd like to see, how we'd like it to be presented. So I think we can move forward. So I'm not quite as fatalistic as you appear to be, or cynical, whichever way you see it. Anyone else have any other comments? Are you happy for me and the Vice Chair liaising with Democratic Services to have a look at how we can transform this into a sleek, rag-rated document that tells us all how well things are going? Councillor Burston, sorry.
Well, yes, I would, I think. But I know it's, you know, some of them, like, you know, additional bays between some houses in St. Stephen's Road. Only 15 people have signed, but that might be every house in that block.
Yeah.
So, you know, just because there are only a few signatures, I think they should be taken, and it's right to be responsive to the people that we represent.
Yeah, and as you say, an issue may only affect a small number of people, but the impact of that could be significant. That's a good point, and we should treat them all equally and not, you know, rank them by how many people signed it.
And I don't know, without you referring to me where it was on the list, but most petitions will go to an executive member for looking at and a decision making. So it won't have been ignored. I want to reassure you it won't have been ignored. You may not like the way the information is presented in the schedule, which is, I think, what the chair's alluded to, how we can update that and maybe look at it. but it won't have been ignored, councillor Burton. No decision will have been made on it.
That's great to hear, because it just says here to be received by CSMC today, and
And I
here
think
we
that's
are.
some of the
That's
terminology.
the terminology misunderstanding that I
Yeah.
was alluding to earlier.
Yeah.
that
So we can-
need to
We
look
can
at.
sort that.
It's good to clarify that.
Yeah,
though.
no, no,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
as new members, you know,
Yeah.
you've got nothing to benchmark
No,
against in terms of
exactly.
what we meant to be deciding. Yeah, okay, thank you for that discussion. Members, so our final agenda item is work plan. Just a couple of updates to cover the 11th of December meeting of this committee. We will hopefully be talking about devolution. We won't be talking about carbon accounting, but we will be talking about the Combined Authorities Net Zero Fund, which kind of better links with the devolution discussion and also relates to our climate change remit, and we'll have finance and performance Q2 monitor. And then 29th of January, we will be talking about Section 106 agreements and community infrastructure levy. The chair and vice chair, myself and the vice chair had a meeting with officers in the planning and city development department, so they know what we'd like them to write a report about. So I'm fairly confident we will have a good discussion on Section 106 agreements, which is an issue I know many members have sought to have a conversation about. Before all of that, we're back again next Monday for a call-in meeting, at which I will see some of you, if not all of you. Any comments on the work plan? No? Okay. And as there is no urgent business, I shall declare the meeting closed, and thank you very much for your attendance and participation. Good night.